Welcome to Eternal Journey, the podcast.
What is up, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Eternal Journey, the podcast that talks about all things eternal with a focus on limited play. I'm your host, Caesar the Crowd Pleaser, aka Jedi, and today we're going to be doing a strategy breakdown. We're going to be going over the going wide strategy in limited. But first things first, we don't have any sponsors or anything fancy like that, so I'm just going to be kind enough to mention twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ is where you guys can catch me streaming live drafts as well as some constructed play every Tuesday and Saturday afternoon, and probably going to start adding a Monday and Thursday mornings to the mix. Definitely check me out there, and you can catch this podcast as well as constructed play, limited play, sealed play, and walkthroughs and whatnot, all on my YouTube channel, which is EJthePodcast on YouTube. So definitely check us out there. All right, guys. So we recently got an announcement to the draft update, and Direwolf decided to switch out the format a little bit, change it up, and make it to where now you get the Eternal pack first, then you get packs 2 and 3 are going to be Defiance that we're used to, and then pack 4 is going to go back to the Eternal seeded packs. So kind of flip-flopping the format a little bit, and so far it's gotten some decent reviews as far as it being different and people enjoying it. So because of that, I went ahead and started a draft right now. Won't be playing it till after this podcast, but I figured for our pack 1 pick 1, I'd rather give you guys something legitimate to go over. So take a little bit of our time with this one just because it's a pseudo new format, and they did change up what is going to be in the Eternal draft packs. So starting off with our commons, we have Yeti Windfinder, which is a 1/1 Yeti for 2 and a blue. It has flying and Yeti ally +1/+1. Meh, not really exciting. A 1/1 flyer for 2 is just okay, but barely. We get plenty of 1/1 flyers with upsides nowadays, and requiring a Yeti synergy to just make it a 2/2 just isn't quite there. Next up, we have Bang Sarasaur. This is a 2/2 dinosaur for 3 at a time. Summon Nightfall, and when you draw a card, Bang Sarasaur gets a +1/+1 this turn. So essentially, it will always be a 2/2 on your opponent's turn. It's always going to be at the very least a 3/3 on your turn. And it will be at least the very next turn after you play it, because Nightfall will trigger, it will be a 4/4. I've seen this card do some work, but not really thrilled about it. Not really excited. Gonna move on. We have a Valkyrie Militant. This is a 2/2 Valkyrie for 4 and a green. It has flying, and when you play a weapon, you gain 2 armor. So flying for 2/2 for 4 isn't that exciting. The upside is a little bit of an up, like it can play some dividends if you're running maybe 3 or 4 weapons in your deck. You are able to up their armor a little bit, maybe increase their chances of being a 2-for-1 or gain some life. So it's not bad, but I'm not really excited taking it as a first pick. I feel like we could do better things and stay a little more open. I mean, granted, this is open, but what I'm saying is the synergy doesn't really trigger unless you're in a specific deck. Next up, we have Lathrai Target Caller. I enjoy this card quite a bit. It is a 3/2 elf for 2 double shadow and has Inspire. Units you draw get quick draw. So I actually like this Inspire effect. The reason being is, granted, I will admit it does not help you when you are behind, but at parity or when you are ahead, it is absolutely phenomenal. Having a bunch of units with quick draw really forces the opponent to be careful about their blocks. A lot of times they have to double block unit to take it out because of the quick draw, and then you can capitalize on that with combat tricks. So I think out of all the commons we've opened up so far, Lathrai Target Caller is probably the highest one right now. It is an elf, which means we could get some synergy payoffs in packs 2 and 3. Of note, it is double shadow, so sometimes you aren't going to get it off on turn 2. It just depends on the way your deck's built, but I think that's our front runner for now. Next up, we have Voracious Fosora. It is a 4/2 dinosaur for 3 and a primal, and it's reckless. Yeah, I don't like this card. Unless you're just ahead or have a bunch of combat tricks, like the 2 toughness just means it dies to a lot of things and it has to attack. So Not thrilled on it. Next up, we have Dormant Sentinel. This is a 7/7 Sentinel for 7 time. Has Empower Overwhelm this turn. This card is a pretty decent finisher in limited. I have seen it do some work. That being said, it is a 7-drop. I'm not really excited about picking it early, so we're moving on. Next is Inspired Obedience. This is a spell, 7 shadow, and kill an enemy unit. Your units get +1 this turn. It is a removal spell and it has some added upside, but yeah, we're not taking a removal spell at 7 right now. It's just way too slow, and we may not even, it's not very splashable being double shadow, so yeah, we're just gonna move on. Next up, we have Cryptic Etchings. This is a relic for 2 and a time. Once per turn, you may pay 2 to scout. So this is a fine card. It is splashable because it's good at every point in the game. It's okay to play it early if you're using some relic synergies, which we could get into in packs 2 and 3. And late, you can always play it and just use its ability to clean up your draws later on. It is very interesting, changing up the way the packs work. So now essentially, before we were drafting the payoff cards and then getting the enablers packs 2 and 3 and see if we're getting paid off in pack 4. Now we're just kind of seeing which enablers are open and then hoping we get the payoffs in packs 2 and 3 and then cleaning up our deck in pack 4. So we'll see what's up with that. So I think I think I'd rather take the body. So I'm still on Target Caller here. All right, going into our uncommons, we have Oni Gunright, which is a 5/3 Oni Gunslinger for 6 red for fire. Gunslinger ally gets Warcry, which I think the show notes or the patch notes did say that they were gonna up the synergies on tribes, including Gunslinger, but we're still not 100% sure how, and we'd have to see how the packs play out to see how that works. So who knows? But it is what it is. It is 5. Oh yeah, and then Tomb, draw a weapon from your void, which could have some synergies. Essentially, if you slap it onto a unit and they kill the unit, you could get it back. So there is some benefit to that, but not super excited about it. Not really thrilled. So still gonna be Target Caller for me. Ooh, here's a good uncommon. So we have Dusk Raider. This is a 2/2 warrior for 2 and a primal. Inspire units you draw get Berserk, and then summon Nightfall. This is one of the stronger Inspire cards, I feel like, because Berserk just ends up leading to really explosive turns. If you have an all fire, you can pump the flyer and get in there. I think it's really solid. At the very least, it is a 2/2 for 2, which is awesome. And only requiring 1 primal means it is very easily splashable. So I like Dust Raider. I think this is going to go ahead and bump up to be my first pick. Of note, there is no warrior synergies, but hey, plus it is in primal, which means you can combo it off with Beastmasters, and that's just awesome. Or Genev with giant sentinels and things like that. Our last uncommon is going to be Repulsive Gorger. This is a 7/4 dinosaur for 7 shadow. And as summoned, you may sacrifice another unit to give each enemy unit a -1/-1. I haven't played with this card too much. I've played with it in points where it didn't do anything. I've played it in points where it did some work. But once again, much like Inspired Obedience and Dormant Sentinel, it is a 7-drop that is pretty replaceable. Honestly, it's not backbreaking. So we're going to pass on it. And our rare, is going to be Corendon Merchant. This is a 2/1 merchant for 3 and a shadow. It has Deadly, and like all merchants, it gives you access to your market, which this one is specifically for shadow. So it is a tough call, honestly, especially with the new format, considering that we're not really sure what kind of deck we're still going to be in. That being said, I do think the merchants are extremely powerful because it gives you the option of playing more niche cards in your deck and adding 5 additional cards to your deck without really costing anything in deck construction. So I think it is a close toss-up between Dust Raider and Merchant, but just the Merchant's abilities to add more diversity to your deck puts it over the top, and it's deadly, so it's going to trade with something in most cases. It does have 1 toughness, which means they're the Lethrai, -1/-1 elf, and the Pitfall can take it out, so that is something of note. But like I said, I think the versatility of merchants is just a little too strong to outweigh the Dust Raider. So I would take a Merchant here, but I could see an easy argument for Dust Raider as well. All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for Pack 1 Pick 1. Definitely a little interesting with the new format. But with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into our main topic. All right. So we're going to be talking about going wide as a strategy in Limited. First up is, what does going wide mean? So in its basic foundation or form, going wide means essentially you are building up your board with more units than your opponent is, thus essentially spreading out across the board wider and giving your attackers the ability to quote unquote flank your opponent with overwhelming numbers. This essentially is done by playing cards that give you more than one unit, or by just keeping your curve low to the ground so you're able to get to the point where you're playing 2 spells a turn sooner than your opponent, and things like that. Typically, the strategy is you have 2 options depending on what kind of opponent you're playing. You can essentially attack each turn, exhausting their defenses. So as you're playing 2 or 3 units a turn, they're playing 1. So slowly but surely, you're still getting in there, overwhelming them. They're forced to make unfavorable blocks, which you can take advantage of with combat tricks and things like that. The other option, and which is slightly more powerful, and I feel like it's a little more supported in this format. Granted, the older format, I have not played the new draft format, is that you get in for chip damage here and there, 2 points here, 3 points there periodically. You're pretty much holding your units back, so you're not sacrificing units, and and just continue to build that large board state until you're able to combo off with some kind of pump effect, or maybe some stun effects or bounce spells to get in for a massive amount of damage that your opponent can't handle and ends up leading to lethal. So like with all limited decks, there are 3 parts to it if you are doing a pseudo build around, which going wide is somewhat of a theme that you have to build around. The first are the enabler cards. These are the cards that essentially let you know that the go wide strategy is open, and this is what's going to allow you to play more units than your opponent. There's different ways of doing this, which we'll go into in a minute. Next are the payoff cards. These are the cards that synergize with your go wide strategy, which are pretty much the ones that help you close out the game. Typically, these are cards that pump up your units or prevent your opponent from blocking effectively and things like that. The main thing is pumping your units, whether it is a static effect or a one-time deal or a combat trick and things like that, that really make your typically standard, cheaper, less effective units more effective by increasing their power. And we'll go over those later on in this episode as well. And finally, you have like the support cards, which kind of go in the deck and they sort of help. They aren't directly impactful on the main synergy of the deck, i.e. they don't give you more than 1 unit per turn, or they do not pump your units, but they do accommodate you getting through and making your opponent make unfavorable or be unable to block, period. And we'll talk about these last because they're kind of niched based on your color and what is available, and we'll go into detail. But those are pretty much the 3 steps or sections or categories for building this go wide strategy. All right, we're going to go in depth on it, specifically talking about this current draft format. So I'm going to be loading up some cards real quick that I pulled aside that are going to be what we're talking about today, because I'm going to continue to do these kind of in-depth strategy builds as new sets come out and talk about specific cards we're looking for. So let's dive right into the enabler cards. Once again, these are the cards that let you play more than 1 unit per turn. Okay, there are several ways of doing the go wide strategy. As I mentioned earlier, you are able to go wide both by playing cards that give you more than 1 unit per turn, or essentially keeping your curve very low to the ground, taking really solid 1, 2, and 3 drops, which allow you to essentially, as soon as turn 3 or 4, start playing more than 1 unit a turn, because your curve is much lower when your opponent is either trying to spin their wheels to ramp, or they are playing combat or removal spells to keep up with you, or essentially just playing their curve, but it's a lot slower. So as soon as you start playing 2 units a turn, they're playing 1. Even if their units are a little bit better, you're going wider, so they aren't able to block everything. So the first kind of key units that we see in these are pretty basic. I mean, it's just stuff that for one card, you're getting more than one unit. And right off the bat, our front runner and our common, which is a little weird now that we're seeing this in pack 2 and 3, is Scavenge. So I really feel like the primary color for this format is going to be base Shadow, because Shadow gives you pretty much, I mean, just straight up access to some effective Grenadins, as well as Scavenge and Rat Cage we'll talk about in a moment, which allows you to trigger additional units per turn. Scavenge is great for 3 power. You are getting 3 units. Granted, the downside is they can't block, but in this kind of deck, we aren't really blocking. We're kind of letting our opponent take damage. If they want to attack us, that's taking one blocker out of the way or several blockers out of the way. So it's what we want to be doing. Scavenge is also great because it synergizes well with enter the battlefield effects on units like, for example, Bear Arms triggers every time a unit comes into play. So Scavenge will trigger it 3 times for one spell, which is huge. And it has a little bit of fixing as well. When you play it, once again, it is a slow spell for 3 and a shadow. And when you play, you get 3 1/1 rats that can't block, but you also gain either a fire or justice influence. So that's the baseline for our deck. We're really excited when we pick up several of those. Next up, we have Assembly Line, which is a similar card. Actually, it's pretty much the same card. It is uncommon though. So this one is 3 in a red. They're a slow spell as well, and you play 3 Grenadins. So it's still, once again, we're playing 1 card to get us 3 units on the board. Even though they're 1/1s, it allows us to, when our opponent plays a 3 drop for their turn, let's say for example Kosul Recruit, we are getting the same amount of power and defense except on 3 units instead of 1. So there is kind of pros and cons to this, but for our strategy, that's what we want to be doing. Next up, we have Rat Cage, which is great because you can play it on turn 1 and you get a 1/1. But if you are in that Relics Matters deck, you're essentially getting free units. If you are able to pick up 2 Rat Cages and have them both in play, they just synergize really well and you just kind of explode. So Rat Cage is another good one that we're picking up. Granted, once again, you want to make sure you have ways to trigger it. If not, it's just going to be a 1/1 for 1, and that's not that exciting. A couple of other notables, we're looking at Grenadin Drone, Firemane Lioness, Spark Hatcher, and Lazy Firemane Sparkbot. Lazy Firemane is great because it is a decent body, it keeps you low to the ground, and then if you have a combat trick, you're getting 2 more units out of it, so it's absolutely phenomenal. One rare payoff, which I am going to mention because it is pretty great in this deck, but I will not go into depth on it just because it is a rare, so we won't see it very often, is Flametail Whip, which is a +1/+1 weapon for 3 fire. It gives the unit charge, and when you summon it, you play 3 1/1 Wildcats with charge, sacrificing them at the end of turn. Essentially, you want to use this when you're going to close out the game. Once again, if there are any units come into play effects, then this will trigger 3 times, and it does give one of your units charge. So that is a nice way of kind of like comboing off and getting in there for extra damage. So all these cards essentially give you more than 1 unit per 1 spell, which is what you want to do to essentially get ahead. And so it's a really solid way to outclass your opponent when it comes to like going wide. And once again, like I said, they are playing 1 or 2 units a turn, and you are playing these spells that give you maybe not as efficient of a unit, but more units overall. So you're able to get in there, right? The other things, like I said, you can take any 2 or 1 drops, 1 or 2 drops that have 2 or 3 power, essentially. Like for example, all the vanilla 3/1s that you see at 2 are solid because they are going to make it as kind of must blocks for your opponent. And if they don't, they might hesitate because they don't want to trade. So they'll get in there for significant damage. And they typically always trade up. So that is a thing. So that is our enablers. These are the cards that essentially let you know that you are able to go wide, right? Next up, we're going to look at our payoffs. These are the cards that you use that will essentially pump all these cheap 1/1 units that we are using. So a couple of things here. Actually, let me backtrack a little bit. I apologize. One last thing. Let me go over a couple of the random 2 drops that don't essentially get you more units, but they do make it difficult for your opponent to block effectively, and then you're getting in for more damage. A couple of things, like I said, I did mention the Territorial Elf, which is the 3/1 Berserk. It can't block, so you really want to be swinging with it. But the fact that it has Berserk means it really combos off well if you're able to get a really good Alpha Strike in there. Snowfort Trumpeter is a 2/2 for 2, but it has Tribute. So if one of your little rats die, you can essentially play a 4/4 for 2, which still lets you play 2 units in 1 turn or a second spell, which is great. You have at rare, you have Stone Scar Sneak, which essentially lets you pump up one of your units a turn to get in there. So even if you have a bunch of 1/1s that can't attack, you can essentially turn them into 4/1s with quick draw, one at a time, and just keep chipping in damage. So later you can get an Alpha Strike when your opponent is low on health. And lastly, two all-stars are Corendon Steward, which is the 1/2 for 2 with Deadly, but in power it becomes a 3/4 until end of turn. This guy, if he comes down on turn 2, he typically gets in there for 6 to 9 damage, so that's more chip damage that your opponent can't handle, and is extremely hesitant to block or may double block to get him off the board, leaving the gateway open for your other 1/1s. And Ravenous Storm Beast, it's a 3/3, essentially a 5/5. If you're playing it in this deck, you want to play it, sacrifice one of your rats or one of your Grenadins, and make it a 5/5 on turn 3, which once again makes it very difficult for your opponent to block. So that's it for the enablers. Now, the payoffs. Once again, these are the cards that make your units better than they are at face value. Very rarely are you going to see this in units. There is the, forgive me, I don't have loaded up right now, but the Time Fire 2/2 Lion that you could pay 5 and pump your whole team till end of turn, +1/+1. That is good, just a little inefficient. It's not really where we want to be, but it is doable. You also, if you are in the Yetis, you can pick up the rare Yeti that pumps all your Yetis, but once again, really not going to be seeing that too often. Another unit that does this also is the War Painter. This is a 1/4 warrior for 3 and a fire, but Inspire +1 attack. So it's not great with our Scavenge and Rat Cages because we aren't drawing those cards, but it is something in a pinch if you need it. I have seen it do some work. Mainly the things we're looking for are going to come out of Shadow and Fire. Baseline, you have Barbarian Camp, which gives all your units a +1 attack. It dropping on turn 4 means you can spend turns 1, 2, and 3 building up your board, playing it on turn 4 and then swinging and upgrading all your guys. Maybe even play it later than that. You also have I can't believe I didn't put in here. On a unit, I apologize, is Intimidator. Let me look it up real quick. I apologize for that, guys. That's so funny. That was like the main card that I was thinking about, and I just didn't load it up. So give me 1 second. I want to make sure I say it correctly. I think it's Lethrai, but let me double check. Yeah, Lethrai Intimidator. This is pretty much the linchpin of the deck. This card is outstanding. Reason being is it is also a 2/4 body, which is very reputable in this format. And then Pledge, you can pledge it, which you probably won't depending on how many you have in your deck, but if you need to, you can. And then Empower, your units get a +1/+0 this turn. So essentially you can even play it on turn 5, play your Sigil, and get in there with all your guys. It synergizes really well with anything that puts additional power into play, like for example the display that does it, Display of Vision, I believe. So you can trigger this twice. It has some really good synergies. It's a solid blocker if you need to, and it can also attack. It's great in multiples. Lethrai Intimidator is just really where you want to be when it comes to going wide. All right, so we have Barbarian Camp, we have Lethrai Intimidator, and we have the War Painter, we have the Lion, and then lastly we have Rally. Rally is another great payoff because it is a fast spell for 3 and a fire. Your units get +2/+0 this turn. So the fact that it's a +2 is huge, and it's a fast spell. So you can essentially attack for your guys with a bunch of 1/1s. Your opponent might be like, it's okay, I'll go down to 8 or whatever. And then you can play this and even upgrade, like trade up for some of their units they did block and put them at a really low life total, or just straight up kill them. I've seen Rally win plenty of games out of nowhere, and Rally is typically the card that goes back to that one version of the strategy where we want to kind of wait, hold back our units until we can get in a really solid Alpha Strike and just crush our opponent in one horrendously large blow. So those are our main payoffs. Obviously, there's going to be some other stuff at rare and things like that that you can see, but that at uncommon and common are pretty much the big things we're going to see and what you want to do for our baseline of our deck. Okay. So yeah, these are the payoffs we're looking for. Once again, let's ride Intimidator, the big one. If you get 2 or 3 in your deck, you're sitting very pretty. Barbarian Camp does a pretty decent job. Oh, I'm sorry, one more. I apologize. There is also Bottoms Up, which is a 1 power, 1 fire fast spell. Give a unit +2 attack this turn. You amplify it for 2 to give another unit +2 this turn. So of note, you can give the same unit to +2. So even though it is not as power efficient as Rally, you are able to stack this in a way where it is efficient for you. So if they decide not to block 1 unit alone, you can pump that unit entirely if they're tapped out. Or you can spread it around for favorable blocks, etc., etc. So Bottoms Up is another good payoff. Note is uncommon. So yeah, guys, that is the foundation of the deck. Those are pretty much the slots that you can't really move on and you need to have for this strategy. Now comes into the third part, or the tertiary part that we spoke about, which is cards that don't necessarily synergize directly with this strategy, but they do assist it. All right, and things like this, I'm going to be pretty general about it. You'll see this in things as combat tricks that are very inexpensive, i.e. 1, occasionally 2 power. For example, Pummel is great in this because it lets you scout so you can clean up your draws. It only costs 1 power, so it enables you to do 2 spells in 1 turn sooner. It pluses your unit by 2, so there's a good chance they'll survive. Whatever unit gets blocked, they'll survive combat. And it takes out 1 of their blockers. Another one is Rampage. Rampage is +3, +1, and Overwhelm. You typically want all these to be fast spells because you want them to win combat. Mob Rule is a less exciting one, but does do the job somewhat. It is a fast spell for 2 and a shadow. Kill an enemy unit with power equal to the or less than the number of units you have. Mob Rule is a little bit better in this deck than most because of the fact that you're going wide, so you're typically going to have significantly more units in play than your opponent. So you can get rid of a troublesome unit easily like this, especially at fast speed. So though that is a solid pickup as well. Once again, it doesn't really do anything to do more damage for your opponent, but it does give you the option to take out a troublesome unit. Some other things of note are stun spells, things like Flash Freeze that enable you for 1 spell, you're taking out 2 of your opponent's blockers. That really changes the clock and you're able to sneak in a whole lot more damage than they might have been prepared for. Plus, stuns also remove them for 2 turns, which is great. So any kind of stun effects, you don't want too many in your deck, but 1 or 2 at the right time could definitely help close out the game, especially if you have, like, for example, turn 5, you have an Intimidator in play, you play your Empower, you play your Sigil, trigger Empower, plussing up all your guys, you Flash Freeze, taking 2 of their blockers away, and you swing with them maybe having 1 or 2 blockers left. It's fantastic. So that's really great, especially if you have a combat trick. Another note is cheap bounce spells. And I say cheap because if you're 2 might even be pushing it. Sometimes I could see it happening because it is a tempo play. You are going down a card for them to go essentially just stay at parity, but they're losing a little bit of tempo because they'd have to replay this card. So I wouldn't do these and just to get in 2 or 3 damage. I would really do it when you can get in something because like 5 to 7 damage in. You want to bounce something that took their whole turn to bounce. So bouncing a 2 drop isn't really efficient. You want to bounce something like a 5 or 6 drop or something with lifesteal that will really help change the clock. There is the Whispers, which is not bad. I believe you can bounce 2 things for 6, which sometimes your deck will get into. And now you're in a similar scenario as what Flash Freeze did because granted, Flash Freeze does take the units out of combat, period. Bounce spells only take them out for that turn, then your opponent can replay them, but it is send them back on tempo. Oops, sorry, I apologize for that, guys. My alarm. Hopefully that wasn't too loud. So, bounce spells work as well, just not as efficient. Of note, if you can get some 1 power spells, that would really work. Occasionally, the fast ones at 2 will work fine because you can bounce something at the end of your opponent's turn if you have the open chance to do it, right? And then we have a couple of units that allow you to take advantage of the pump effects and things like that. These, once again, stuff like Stone Scar Sneak and Steward are fine. These will get in on their own, but we're looking at things kind of like Corrupted Umbran. I say this because it is 3/4 for 4 Shadow with Berserk and Lifesteal. So this card is great because it really lets you change the clock on it. Your opponent is going to be used to trying to fight off all these small creatures. Then with this guy, you trigger 1 or 2 plus attacks on it. So now it's a 5/4, for example, getting in there for double damage and giving you a bunch of life. So if your opponent tried to race you and they're going to try to deal more damage to you before you can kill them, this really swings it back in your favor. Even as is, if it goes unanswered, there's a good chance it's going to gain you 6 life and get in there, or take out 1 or 2 of their blockers, force them to double block it, thus leading so the rest of your units can get in there. So those are the kind of things that you want in the deck. A little bit of chief removal like Suffocate is good, or Torch. These are really solid things because once again, they are enabling you to make more than 1 play per turn, and that's where you want to be, so you are out-tempoing your opponent. But yeah, that is pretty much the go wide strategy in a nutshell, guys. Once again, there are multiple variations to this. I've seen people play green in it and take advantage of things like Bear Arms or a bunch of cheap flyers, obviously because they have a couple of 1/1s for 1 that you can pump up and things like that. It just depends on what is open. But like I said, pretty much I almost feel like Shadow has to be the primary core of the deck, mainly for Intimidator and Scavenge. But I can see other colors I've seen it done plenty of times with Fire relying on Rally to do the work, and drones and things like that. So yeah, anything that does incremental damage to your opponent can really reach. You do want to take advantage of a couple of spells like fire spells that actually deal damage to the face to sneak in there. If you are in the Relic Matters, you can get the drain effects like the 1/2s that every time you play one, it drains them. Things like that. Or Unblockable is a really solid play for this as well, because they could take advantage of the pump effects. But all right, guys, that is going to do it for our main topic. The past week, we did have a long Homecoming Hero event, and because I am also into Singleton, I'm going to go ahead and take a minute to talk about this a little bit, and then we will call it a show. So just a couple of hot takes that I got from the format. I wasn't able to play all 7 rounds of the game like I would have liked to. I did enjoy it thoroughly, but you know, being an adult and time constraints, I wasn't able to. I am very much so still pushing for a Singleton format to happen. As of right now, I'm still doing it closer to MTG's Commander ADH format, but if they do release the hero format here on Eternal as a solid format, then I will modify it. If you're interested, check out the Discord, which link is down below, and we can talk about it and potentially get some games. But moving on to the hero event. So, like I said, I played 3 times, so that was roughly 25, 26 games. And I ended up playing a Argenport deck, green and purple, or Shadow and Justice. And that was kind of just a removal good stuff deck, a little bit of lifesteal synergies and stuff like that, nothing too crazy. And it worked out pretty well. I ended up going, I take that back. I did play 4 rounds. I apologize. I just didn't do very well one of the rounds because I ended up playing the Argenport deck twice. And I played that one as a Vara lead and as a Roland lead. And Roland did some work. I think he won me a couple of games. Vara, not so much. I think that might have been the not so great run I did, actually. But I think those were fine. They were fun decks to play. The other one I played was a Rakano Armory type deck where I was playing a lot of units that triggered Renown or had Aegis, and then ways to buff them with some rare weapons and things like that got in there. That deck really was able to roll over on people. It struggled a little bit with some Vara decks just because I couldn't capitalize on the Aegis of those decks, but in most cases, if the people didn't have an answer for one or my 2 Voltron units, they just got in there and out. I out synergized them. For those, I ran Akaria, big Akaria, the 5/5, as my hero because I think she was just a great finisher. They're wasting all these resources on my small units, and then she can come in late game and clean up, which she did in most cases. A couple other hot takes real quick. So there was a ton of Winchest. Fire, just a Shadow, was just all over the place with a Vara lead. I believe it was the highest deck or the most common deck list on Eternal Warcry. It was everywhere. It was just literally the standard or constructed deck, just with a little more variance but those colors have so much depth, so much removal, so much good units that there wasn't very much synergy other than the fact that we're just gonna kill everything and then play Vara. And that deck got there. I played a lot of it. Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost. but I almost want to say most of my losses was from that. So something of note. Next, removal is still really, really good. Once again, that kind of gives tips the hat to the win chest. I did play some Argenport decks, a lot of decks that a lot of people were playing Shadow and just went deep on the removal, playing just about every removal card they could. And as long as it matched up well to what was on the board, like eventually you run out. As you noticed, neither of the colors I was playing really had a lot of card draw. So there was just mainly 1-for-1 sweeps, and then it was who had the last creature standing, so to speak. So removal is really good still. That being said, that makes Aegis typically really good against any deck that's not running Vara, which once again, it was interesting because Vara lead was very, very common, but I did see, especially with my Armory deck, that the decks that just didn't run Vara, like they didn't run Shadow at all, they never saw her, I just ended up almost steamrolling because it was just so taxing on their removal, getting 2-for-1s and things like that on their removal to try to remove units, and then just having another one come down with Aegis really taxed them, especially if I had on a unit with lifesteal or evasion like flying. It just worked out really well. So ton of fun, still a solid game plan. Next up, let's see, both high synergy decks work as long as the depth is there, and good stuff piles with removal work great as well. So going back to the win chest, if you just have a bunch of good cards and a bunch of removal, you're gonna get there most of the time. So, but also synergy decks work. Like I said, my Rakano deck really worked on Renown and Aegis to pump my guys with these really efficient weapons, and it got there. I felt like it really did. It was really strong. I did see a graveyard synergy deck from Xenon that worked really well. I can't remember if I beat it or not. I don't remember. I think it might have taken me down. So synergy decks, if you're able to pick a theme and build around it, like going wide or something like that, not many sweepers are being played in this format, believe it or not. At least I didn't see it. I think people just like rather throwing haymakers at each other. So they work really well. You're able to have a lot of fun. And last, I think high cost payoff heroes work better than cheaper ones unless there's high synergy involved. So last time there was the hero event, I tried running the rebel guy now. Let me look it up real quick. I think it's Eros or something like that. The Rakano, the promo. Anywho, let me look it up. Milos, there you go, Milos. So I ended up running him in a similar kind of Rakano deck, and like he just didn't really get there. I've seen a couple of people run the Paladin one and Alessa, the spell one. The Alessa one wasn't bad. I almost actually lost that deck. They went heavy lifesteal, I think, and they just got a bunch of triggers. They also got the rare out that, or maybe it was a different deck. They got the lifesteal pumps all your guys, but either way, they did some work. And it was okay, but I felt like it was underwhelming. Also, if your opponent has an answer to Vara, if you play her too early and they have an answer still, like that seems really inefficient versus like your 7, 8, and 9 drop heroes really are haymakers. Like they affect the board in such a big way. Like case in point, like I said, Roland gave all my guys, or at least 3/4 of my team, endurance, and then they couldn't be damaged, which just let me swing in there repeatedly with lifesteal and things like that. Getting in there for chip damage or just really trading efficiently with my opponent. And Akaria just coming out of nowhere, a 5/5 with lifesteal or with charge and Warcry 5, and then sometimes I would get the infiltrate draw card, sometimes I'd get lifesteal on her, sometimes I get deadly. Like it was just so efficient, or mentor +2/+2. Like there's so many things that, or even entomb draw a card. Like then they'd have to spend 3 spells on her, or 2 spells on her, and I'd get a card back. So it was just great. Like I really think those heavy duty payoffs, Azendel, things like that really kind of come into play, help you since you're guaranteed to draw them. So yeah, just something to think about for future reference and stuff like that whenever the event comes back, or if they do decide to make it a more permanent thing. But all right, guys, that's going to do it for a show. I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to try to keep a schedule, keep these coming out on Tuesday. Got a little wrapped up this week and stuff, so with some teacher training on the aerial side, and so I wasn't able to record on time. But like I said, I'm going to stick to a schedule as best as I can. You can catch me on Twitter, Patreon, and YouTube at EJthePodcast. My real life Instagram, if you want to see all my side jobs like cosplay and aerial stuff and fire stuff, you can catch me at CaesarLabear7. You can catch me streaming live at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. So Tuesdays and Saturday afternoons for sure. Discord is in the link below if you want to come hang out and chat. And if you have any comments or anything, you can put them in the comments below. If you're listening to this on SoundCloud, YouTube, or iTunes, or you can email me at EJthePodcast@gmail.com with anything. And as usual, I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to Limited Resources, which is a limited podcast about Magic the Gathering. It's what I'm kind of gauging, or kind of, what's the word? Not gearing this podcast towards. Guidant. Kind of using it. I don't know. Whatever. Don't worry about it, guys. They're great. Marshall and LSV are great. Check them out. All right, guys. That will do it for this week. Until next time, keep on gaming.